Okay, I just got out of the theaters, and this is everything that the film Heretic gets both right and wrong about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church or the LDS Church. Starting with the stuff they got right, I thought the costume design was on point. It was really true to the missionary dress code. The missionaries' acting was really good. The actresses who played the sister missionaries were former members themselves, and I do think that contributed and influenced their style. They got the missionary safety rules pretty right. If you were a female missionary, you are not supposed to go into the home of a male unless there's another woman present, and vice versa if you're a male missionary. The villain, Mr. Reed, tells the story of how the Book of Mormon came to be, and he told that story fairly accurately. They got the nuances of the word of wisdom right, talking about how they can't have caffeine, but then the sister corrects them and says, well, it doesn't technically say soda. And then there's a little joke about choosing the right when they're trying to choose between the belief door or the disbelief door, and Sister Paxton's like, let's choose the right, like in primary. And we do use that phrase, and we do use it as a joke sometimes. And now for the much bigger list of everything it did not do 100% accurately. The first opening scene when the sister missionaries are on a park bench is just like so outlandish because they're talking about like condoms and corn, and it's just so out of character for missionaries that it was just like really out of touch. Magic underwear is talked about a lot in this film, and it is an inaccurate way to refer to what Latter-day Saints call the temple garment, and I felt like that motif was a little bit overhanded. Sister Paxton mentions how when she dies, she wants to come back as a butterfly as a good omen, and that's a nice motif that runs through the film, but the reality is Latter-day Saints just don't believe in reincarnation. The history of Joseph Smith's polygamy is one they really kind of botched, in my opinion. They really messed up the relationship with Fanny Alger, the dating of that event, the Peacemaker pamphlet, and how Joseph Smith did not actually author that. It felt like the writers were really out of date on the newest historical evidence on all of those topics, and that they just really didn't do very much research. This one's the most egregious. The parallels between Jesus and a bunch of these other gods. Mr. Reed makes the argument that Jesus is just like a copycat of all these other religions, and he draws absurd parallels between like the Persian god Mithras and Horus and Krishna that are just factually untrue. I felt like he misrepresented the Latter-day Saint belief in the nature of God, and also the truthfulness of the church is either like 100% true or 0% true, and I think that's a false dichotomy. The way they showed missionaries and companionships was a little off too. Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes are definitely in a companionship, and they very much portray that dynamic well, but there's also an Elder Kennedy, and he's always like this lone single missionary, and that would never happen. He'd always have a companion with him. The birth control one is just odd because at one point the villain Mr. Reed talks about how like no missionary would have birth control, and the sister missionary confirms that like, oh yeah, no one would talk about it because they'd be too ashamed, and it's like, that is not true. The church doesn't have a policy prohibiting contraceptives. The overarching thesis of the villain is that all religion is about control, and specifically misogynistic, like male control over women. And if you already believe that about religion, I'm probably not going to convince you otherwise, but I personally do reject that and don't believe that that's a fair representation of what religion's trying to do. And finally, in a very out of character moment, Sister Paxton talks about how like, well, yeah, prayer doesn't actually work. There was a study done that proved that, but it's still nice to think about people every once in a while. And there was a study done that showed that people who prayed for patients in a hospital ward did not have improved health outcomes. But that kind of misses the point of prayer because we don't believe that prayer is like this cosmic vending machine that gives us whatever blessings we pray for in any quantifiable manner. Overall, certainly this film was suspenseful, intense, frightening, and content warning. It's definitely not going to be everyone's cup of tea. It is pretty graphically violent, but I appreciated that the missionaries did have a sense of realism to them. They weren't just complete caricatures of Mormon missionaries. But in his portrayal of religion, and Latter-day Saints specifically, I would say, in my very unscientific point of view, that it was about 30% accurate, so it's not one I would particularly recommend in that regard.